Daniel chapter 9, part 2. I think there is so much in this chapter that it's going to be too much for 1 week and too little for 2 weeks this point forward. So I think this is going to be Daniel 9, parts 2 today and parts 3 maybe next week. There are two themes in Daniel: how to live in a post-Christian society and the sovereignty of God. He sets up kings, he removes kings, and he puts kings into the hands of the lowliest of men. God wants us to search his scriptures and then share the secrets. The secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things that are revealed belong to us and to our children forever. It is the glory of God to conceal things, but the glory of kings is to search things out. So why do we study eschatology? To work for him, to live for him, to be excited to work and live for him, to be blessed, and ultimately to watch and to pray. Last week we talked about America's wake-up call and how that shifted several years later to America has gone woke. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness. We talked about Daniel, we talked about his little window of time when he saw the fall of Babylon. He walked with the king and therefore he slept with the lions. He saw the time of the Gentiles, the coming Messiah. And so he asked the question, well, what about Israel? And I asked the question, what about the USA? What did he do? What should we do? He went to the Bible and he prayed. He went to the Bible and he discovered through Jeremiah that it's going to be 70 years and the captivity is going to end. By the way, there are two windows of 70 years. Now, I think this is pretty exciting. The first window is from the time Daniel was taken, 605 BC. It was 70 years until the release of the Jews back to Babylon. But then there's another 70-year window, and this is what I think is exciting. 586 was the defeat of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple. And then we go, and Ezra was told, go and rebuild the temple. And it fell into trouble. The Samaritans wanted to help, and he said, look, we're in this thing on our own. We don't want your help. And so 15 years go by before they pick up the task again. And in God's providence, that 15-year delay gave them another total 70 years from the time the temple was destroyed till the time the temple was rebuilt. So we talked about what is true prayer. We covered 7 aspects from Daniel chapter 9. And then we got into the second half. If there are 2 verses of the entire book of Daniel that you want to go away with, one is verse 23. You are greatly loved. And the second one is verse 24. It's right here. 70 weeks are decreed about your people and your holy city, to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for iniquity, to bring everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint a most holy place. Those 2 verses, verse 23, verse 24, verse 24 has those 6 infinitives. Now we're going to read the rest of what we're going to cover today. Know therefore and understand that from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem, to the coming of anointed one, a prince, there shall be 7 weeks. Then for 62 weeks it shall be built again with squares and moat, but in a troubled time. And after the 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war. Desolations are decreed. And he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half of the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abominations shall come one who makes desolate, until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. Got all that? We're going to boil it down In its simplest terms, a Persian king will order Jerusalem to be rebuilt. After 483 years, a Jewish king will come. But your people, the Israelites, the Jews, will reject him. Then a Roman king will destroy the temple about 40 years later. We don't know if Gabriel told Daniel about the church age. And then another kind of king is coming with an offer of peace. He will renege after 3.5 years and spend the next 3.5 years persecuting your people. But then there's a complete fulfillment. The Jewish king is coming again. And this time, his people will accept him. The glory of the temple will be restored. The Jewish king will bring universal and everlasting peace. And Dan, Les, you're going to be there. That's Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 through 27. Let's avoid dueling prophecies. Somebody who says, this is the way it is, and there's no... Harold Campion, the Millerites, people all tried to come up with a date, and they were all wrong. Watch and pray was one of the reasons we study eschatology. There are things happening right now. Russia is fighting with the Ukraine, and that's Ezekiel chapter 37. China has bases in Cuba, and we just said that we're not going to defend Taiwan. At least one of the administration people said that. We are in end times. Watch and pray. So last week we covered this, and we're going to cover it again. Then we're going to get into new territory. John's Old Testament calendar reckoning. If 0 is Jesus and 1000 BC is David and 2000 BC is Abraham, you split the difference. Moses is 1500 and Daniel is 500. None of those are accurate, but each of those is close. So the prophecy of the 70 weeks, and we're going to go through all the different bullets on this thing. It'll be able for you to read. We've spent the 70 years of captivity as Daniel was taken originally, and he was reading about it turning loose. But the 70 years of captivity have a reason, and it's interesting. You have 490 years pointing in one direction and 490 years pointing in another direction. The first 190 years is a representation of all of the times the Jewish people did not keep the Sabbath. Now, the Sabbath is far more than every seventh day you don't work. They were to use their fields. They're an agrarian society for 6 years. The 7th year, the land was supposed to rest, and a miracle occurred because in the 6th year, there was enough food to eat then, to read in the 7th, and then eat in the 8th up until harvest time. But there were 490 rotations, 490 years, 70 rotations, where they skipped keeping that portion of what is called the Sabbath. And so they had to repay. So the land was desolate. To fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land had enjoyed its Sabbaths. All the days that it lay desolate, it kept Sabbath to fulfill 70 years. That's pointing historically back to 490. Daniel confesses his sins, the sins of his people. He includes himself in that request. And he asks God to restore the nation Israel. Now, some folks, because Israel had no real estate, it was called Palestine. Palestine was a Roman tweak on the word Philistine, just to put it to the Jews. And so a lot of folks, a lot of teachers would say, well, the church is Israel. We're going to take a look at this verse a couple of times, once this morning and once next Sunday. I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So in the promises fulfilled to Israel, the people beyond the nation of Israel are also being blessed. We're up to bullet 4. The 70 weeks begin with the issuing of a command to restore and build Jerusalem. Now you see there a picture of a cuneiform. That's a clay tablet that they inscribed their decrees and their history, and then they baked it to keep it for posterity. I mentioned last week, and I saw another one this week, an article about artificial intelligence in Israel, where they're reading these things at lightning speed, and there are only over 10,000 of them yet to be translated. How cool would it be if the various decrees, like this one, they find the one and they translate it? Archaeology and science will all prove that the Bible is true. So then we come to bullet 5. The walls, the moat, the plaza, and the streets of Jerusalem are rebuilt in spite of opposition. January of this year, the archaeologists found a trench around Jerusalem. And I'm thinking, I don't remember reading about a trench or a moat in Jerusalem except in this verse. But once again, the archaeologists are proving that the Bible is true. Know therefore and understand that from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem to the coming of an anointed one, a prince, there shall be 7 weeks. Then for 62 weeks it shall be built again with squares and moat, but in a troubled time. So Ezra had trouble, Nehemiah had trouble. They wanted Nehemiah to come down off the building of the walls and come talk to the enemy at a plain called Ono, and he said, oh no, 52 days to build those walls. But I want you to hone in on that word, a prince. There shall be 7 weeks. You're going to see a graphic here shortly where some people take those 69 weeks and they come up with the baptism of John, baptism by John. Well, that has nothing to do with prince. It's going to be Palm Sunday where those things all come to fruition. So what is the starting point? The starting point of all those years that we're talking about. What is the starting point? 70 weeks begin with the issuing of a command to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. So there are 4 different decrees. 3 of them are off. The first one is in 2 Chronicles. It's off because it's not the rebuilding of Jerusalem, it's the rebuilding of the temple. The second one is off. It's the rebuilding of the foundations of the temple. The third one is off. It's the decree to collect the cash for the free will offerings, the service at the temple. It's the fourth one, King Artaxerxes, that decrees that Jerusalem should be rebuilt. And he doesn't do it just one time, because as we read through a narrative, we're going to see where he's writing letters to all the people between his capital and Jerusalem, that Jerusalem's going to be rebuilt. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, whose mother was Esther, we'll get to that connection this coming week. You're all welcome to come. When wine was brought to him, Nehemiah took the wine and gave it to the king. I had not been sad in his presence before, so the king asked me, why does your face look so sad when you are not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of heart. I was very much afraid, but I said to the king, may the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my fathers are buried lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire? And the king said to me, what is it you want? Then I prayed to the God of heaven, and I answered the king. A few thoughts on prayer, and then we'll come back to the study. First of all, in Daniel, there are 2 notable prayers. The one we've already covered, and it said the answer was, while I was yet praying, the answer came. And chapter 9 gives that prayer in detail. We're going to read in chapter 10 that 21 days he was anguishing over prayer before his prayer was answered. In Esther, the word prayer isn't even mentioned, and yet fasting is mentioned, and yet I'm sure there was a whole lot of praying going on. Now in Daniel 9, we have all those first 22 verses that talk about Daniel's prayer, and here we have Nehemiah. He was asked the question, what is it you want? I prayed to the God of heaven and answered the king. Your prayer doesn't have to be this long soapbox. Your prayer simply has to be communication with God. Ask and you shall receive, seek and you shall find. Let him send me to the city in Judah where my fathers are buried, so that I can rebuild it. Then the king, with the queen sitting beside him, asked me, how long will your journey take, and when will you get back? It pleased the king to send me, so I set a time. So far it's all dialogue. I also said to him, if it pleases the king, may I have letters. May I have your decree. The clock started. May I have letters to the governors of Trans-Euphrates, the other side of Euphrates between the capital and Jerusalem, so that they will provide me safe conduct until I arrive in Judah. And may I have yet another letter, another decree. So now we're way into the plurals. May I have a letter to Asaph, keeper of the king's forest, so that he will give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel. And because the gracious hand of my God was upon me, the king granted my requests. His requests were for letters. The request was for a decree. And so you see those 4 different decrees, and they all seem to be off except that one. So now we're back to that graphic again. Bullet 6, appearance of Messiah as the Prince of Israel at his triumphal entry. And there's the verse. Now, therefore, and understand that from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem to the coming of an anointed one, a prince, there shall be 7 weeks. Then for 62 weeks it shall be built again with squares and moat, but in a troubled time. I'm going to hone in on that word prince. Luke chapter 1. Keep in mind, Gabriel was the same guy that's talking to Daniel that's now talking to Mary. But the angel said to her, do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favor with God. You will be with child and give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over the house of Jacob. Royalty. So there'll be 2 triumphal entries. The one is recorded in the Gospels, and the other one's recorded in Zechariah. And Zechariah says this, rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion, shout in triumph, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming. He is just and endowed with salvation, humble and mounted on a donkey, even on a colt, the foal of a donkey. 2 triumphal entries. So, look to bullet 7. Messiah the Prince will be cut off after 69 weeks. Now, this is, in my mind, an interesting word study. There's the verse. And after 62 weeks, an anointed one, the word Messiah means anointed one, in Greek it's Christ. After 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing. Now, that word cut off is the Hebrew word karath. And you can read the definitions: to destroy, to cut off. The one I find is interesting is right there on the 3rd line, to make a covenant or to break a covenant, to covenant. Now, here's where it comes together. In Genesis 15, where God made his covenant with Abram, he said, take these animals and flay them, put them in half. And then when Abram was done, a deep sleep came over him, and a flame walked between them. And it came to pass that when the sun went down and it was dark, behold, a smoking furnace and a burning lamp that passed between those pieces. In the same day, the Lord karath. In the same day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram. Now, why did they split those animals in half? The idea was, if we break this covenant, this is what's going to happen to you. So they split the animals in half, and the 2 partners, they walk through the divide. Well, Abram didn't walk through the divide. It was just God. It was a one-sided covenant. So what happened? The people sinned. They broke the covenant, and Jesus had to be cut off. So you see how all those words tie together. After 62 weeks, the Messiah shall be cut off and shall have nothing. We sing this song, "Crown him with many crowns," and the king, of course, needs to have a crown. There's Christ coming in, and there was no record that day of anything put on his head. But just a few days later, he was crowned. And you see that sign, INRI? Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Crown him with many crowns. We're going to cover Luke's passage of that first triumphal entry, and we're going to tie it to Daniel and to Zechariah. They brought it to Jesus, the colt. They brought it to Jesus, threw their cloaks on the colt, and put Jesus on it. As he went along, people spread their cloaks on the road. And when he came near the place where the road goes down the Mount of Olives, the whole crowd of disciples began joyfully to praise God in loud voices for all the miracles they had seen. Now keep in mind, Jesus started in Bethany, came to the Mount of Olives, went down through the Kidron Valley, and then entered into Jerusalem that first day, that first triumphal entry. This second triumphal entry, Jesus is starting in the clouds. And he won't be on a donkey, he'll be on a white horse. The Bible says his vesture is dipped in blood. And where's he going to land? The Mount of Olives. What's he going to do between the Mount of Olives, the Kidron Valley, and Jerusalem? You read Zechariah chapter 3, and Zechariah chapter 3 says he's going to stop, he's going to get cleaned up, he's going to have different robes, he's going to get on that donkey, and he's going to go into Jerusalem. Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest. That's what the people were shouting. Some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." "I tell you," he replied, "if they keep quiet, the stones will cry out." As he approached the Jerusalem, saw the city, he wept over it and said, "If you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace." The Bible says he came unto his own, and his own received him not. But to as many as received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God. He was saying, if you had only known your king is here. You say, well, John, what if they accepted him? There wouldn't be any cross. Jesus knew. God knows the end from the beginning. He knew the people were going to reject him. This was no plan B that he had to go on the cross. But he was condemning the Pharisees because those were the scholars, those were the ones who understood, well, didn't understand, but those who studied Daniel. He said, if you had only known that on this day what would bring you peace, but now it is hidden from your eyes. The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. That's going to come about 40 years later when the Romans come. In that last week, the disciples, they were with Jesus, and they said, look at those marvelous stones. And those stones definitely are marvelous. If you go over there, if you go over to the Western Wall, you can't even take a penknife and stick it between those stones. They are so finely hewn and so perfectly put together. And Jesus said, not one stone will be upon another, and we'll get to that. The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and your children within your walls. Now that's not news, because when the Babylonians went into Jerusalem, they dashed the children against the ground. And when the Persians came into Babylon, they dashed the children against the ground. Read Psalm 137. And then when the Romans come, the same thing happens. They say, that's barbaric. We've killed millions of our own kids. They will not leave one stone on another because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you. And after 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing, and the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. The anointed one, the Messiah, the Christ, was crucified. And then on 70 AD, Titus Vespasian came and destroyed the temple and did not leave one stone on another. So what happened was this. They sieged the city. In fact, the siege was so bad that the people were starving. Finally, they breached the walls, they storm in, and Vespasian wanted to spare the temple. But some Roman soldier took a torch, threw it in the temple, hit those curtains that were ripped from top to bottom, and the temple started to burn. Now, the temple was gilded with gold, and all that gold started melting and going down inside the cracks of those stones. And those Roman soldiers took their pry bars and tore those bars apart to get the gold. And so that's how not one stone will sit upon the other. Now, fast forward several hundred years in the Crusades, and the Crusaders come and they take Jerusalem. And what those Crusaders were doing, they would take hammers or whatever tools they had and break pieces of those stones off and go back and sell those relics to the people in Europe. And they would get the same price as if they were selling gold. And that's where the phrase worth its weight in gold came from. Let his blood be upon us and on our children. Why? What crime has he committed? Asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, crucify him. And when Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. I am innocent of this man's blood, he said. It's your responsibility. And the people answered, let his blood be on us and on our children. Luke's gospel, they will fall by the sword and will be taken as prisoners to all nations. Jerusalem will be trampled on by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. Now, there's a difference between the phrase, the time of the Gentiles, and the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. The fullness of the Gentiles has come in speaks of the time when the church will have been completed and it's now rapture time. The fullness of the Gentiles has come in. The times of the Gentiles are the times when that piece of real estate we know as Israel is ruled by some non-Jew. So it was Nebuchadnezzar, it was the Medes and Persians, it was Alexander the Great and his generals, it was the Romans, it'll be the Antichrist. And when the Antichrist is done in Revelation chapter 19, that is the fullness of the times of the Gentiles. There'll be no more Gentiles ruling Jerusalem. Its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war. We'll contrast that with Revelation chapter 12. The serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman to sweep her away with a flood. The Romans sieged Jerusalem and they stormed in, they killed the babies. There has been war on an increasing basis ever since. And after the Antichrist reneges on his peace treaty, war will continue until Armageddon. We're going to see in the next few verses, the Antichrist is going to promise peace. The horse on the rider on the white horse with the bow and no arrows. He's going to offer peace. There will be peace. He'll flatter the Jewish people. They will make a covenant with him. 3.5 years later, he will renege against that peace treaty, and it's going to be the great tribulation, the time of Jacob's trouble from that point forward until the Battle of Armageddon. So what are the signs of his coming? Say, John, you're supposed to be studying Daniel chapter 9. They're all tied together. What are the signs of his coming? For many will come in my name, claiming I am the Christ, and will deceive many. There are a lot of strange ideas out there. There are a lot of people that have been deceived. Wars and rumors of wars. We've got a war in Ukraine, and there's a rumor of war coming on as we find out that the Chinese have taken over the Russian bases in Cuba. There's a rumor of war. Nation will rise against nation. You just listen to the people in the streets of Iran and Iraq. Death to America, death to America. The only reason they want death to America is that America is the ally of the Jew, the ally of Israel. Famines and earthquakes in various places. Now, King James has the word pestilence in there. So how could the other translations miss that word? Well, when you read the footnotes in your study Bibles, they'll talk about the more complete manuscripts. Well, there are not so complete manuscripts that predate those complete manuscripts where things like pestilence appear. So what happens over time? Making copies, this and that. Somebody says, see, the Bible is imperfect. There's nothing by losing the word of pestilence that impacts my salvation or the way I was saved. There'll be famine and earthquakes and pestilence. COVID, the grand example of worldwide pestilence. It's also a grand example of how a one world government could very easily control the world. It would shut down the whole world. It's a sign of the times. And these are the beginning of birth pains. Now, anybody that has had a baby, or those of us that were in the spectator sport position of that, Jenny's shortest labor was 24 hours. So it's not like you feel the tremor and here's the baby. Signs of the time. Maybe some women do that. They're the lucky ones. But stay with me, okay? These are the beginnings of birth pains. You'll be handed over to be persecuted and put to death, and you'll be hated by all nations because of me. Well, there's persecutions of the Jew right now. There's persecution of the Christian right now. I'm blessed to be born into this slice of history and geography where I don't have those things so much, but I can't even bring up the word of Christ in a business conversation as an example. At that time, many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other. And many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. And because of the increase of wickedness, the love of many, I don't know how they went from many to the most, the love of many shall wax cold. Church of Laodicea. Jesus said, I would that you were either hot or you were cold, but because you're lukewarm, I'm just going to spew you out. Now, it's very easy for us to sit here and say, first of all, oh me, oh my. We're supposed to be blessed by eschatology. And it's not us to say, oh, those guys over there, those woke guys, or whatever you want to label people. I think if each and every one of us are honest with ourselves, we're not on fire like we used to be. We're not doing things like we used to do. And that's where we are as a nation. That's where we are as a society. And that's where we are as the world. The love of many shall wax cold. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations. And then the end will come. A person would say, see, the rapture can't come yet because Whitcliffe is still out there translating Bibles. First of all, Billy Graham, before he died, managed to have a worldwide crusade. You say, well, that didn't reach everybody. We're going to take a peek at Psalm 19 and Romans 1. Psalm 19 says this, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech nor are there words whose voice is not heard. There's your translation to every person in this geography and every person across history. Their voice goes out throughout all the earth, and their words to the ends of the world. Romans, so they are without excuse. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. Well, what did God show them? What did God show me? His invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and his divine nature, can be clearly seen, can be clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. You know, we think we're so wonderful. Sean got a new hip. Bob got a new hip. I've got a son-in-law that needs a new ankle. We can't figure out how to make an ankle yet. What happened when Moses had those Egyptian wizards, magicians? Oh, they made snakes. They did other things, but when Moses turned the dust into gnats, those Egyptians said, only God is a maker of life. The visible things of this world testify of the invisible, so that man is without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God. Yeah, I can see that there's intelligent design. Don't try to argue with an evolutionist, because it's a faith system. You either believe in God or you don't. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give him thanks. But they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, this rock is 357 years and 27 days old. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man. And in this country, it's not just the image of mortal man. We worship self, secular humanism. So now we're down to number 10. Nations will be in anguish and perplexed at the roaring and tossing of the sea. Why are people worried about global warming? Because New York's going to be underwater in 10 years. Well, that was prophesied 50 years ago, and the water line is still where it was. But yet the nations are in anguish, and they're perplexed. And back to Daniel, many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. When I was a kid, we didn't have exchange students. When I was in college, they didn't say, you can take this semester and go study in London. But we're now in the end times, and people are roaming to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. And he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week. And for half of the week, he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. Keep in mind, we're talking weeks translates into years. And on the wing of abomination shall come one who makes desolate, until the decree end is poured out on the desolator. That'll happen in Revelation 19. We read in Matthew 24, so when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that caused desolation, spoken of through the prophet Daniel, this is Christ speaking, and this should put to bed all those people that thought Daniel didn't write the book. Spoken of through the prophet Daniel. Let the reader understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. We use the phrase, run to the hills. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you, from the very first prophet through John the Baptist, through Moses and Elijah in the book of Revelation. How I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. Look, your house is left desolate. I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So a few verses on abomination. We're in Daniel chapter 9. Jump a little bit ahead to chapter 11. Forces from him shall appear and profane the temple and fortress, and shall take away the regular burnt offering. Now, we studied a couple weeks ago that was Antiochus Epiphanes. Well, it's going to be the Antichrist as well. And they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. He shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant. The Antichrist is going to come. He's going to offer peace. He's going to offer prosperity. And he's going to flatter the Jewish people to take them away from their rules and regulations. Just like Antiochus Epiphanes, he changed the dates, he changed the calendars, he changed the laws, he changed the temple, he built other temples to worship Jupiter. Matthew 24. When you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. And then Mark 13. When you see the abomination that causes desolation stand where it does not belong, let the reader understand. Let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. So then we come to the question, what about Israel after the time of the Gentiles? I mentioned to you that the time of the Gentiles ends, Revelation 19, the Battle of Armageddon. For the Israelites will live many days without king or prince, without sacrifice or sacred stones, without ephod or idol. And afterwards, the Israelites will return and seek the Lord their God and David their king. They will come trembling to the Lord and to his blessings in the last days. So we're back to the schematic again. We talked about the 70 years. We talked about the 7 and the 62. We skip over the church age because they skipped over the church age for Daniel as well. And we come to these bullets, 9, 10, and 11. A treaty with the Jewish people, Revelation chapter 6. The coming prince will suddenly break his treaty 3.5 years into the tribulation. And a time of great and unparalleled blessings begin for the nation of Israel. So you can't read that print, but those are 4 of the 6 bullets that are in that one verse I wanted you all to highlight.